Yes. Welcome to Ahead of the Curve podcast. I'm Ash, and today I have with me the world Dr. Stevekeen. Sir, it is truly a one-of-a-kind privilege to host you, especially for young, budding iconoclasts and those who dare to think outside of the norm and those who dare to cross the Rubicon. Thank you, sir, for appearing.
You're welcome. I've got to pass on keep the iconoclastic going. I don't want the mainstream to win just by the lack of opposition.
Yes, I will. I mean, for sure, carry forward the torch in that leg. But a general question, I mean, how have the last couple of minutes, Bob, been for you as such? I mean, any economic-related work, any movies that you saw which were interesting, anything that was...
Oh, look, I spend my time working. I used to joke that I couldn't wait till I could retire so I could get some serious work done. And now I realize that's not funny. It's all I'm doing is working. So if I had to recommend one show that I got a laugh out of, which broke the monotony of working all the time, it was the Netflix series Lucifer, which I was a late convert to. And that was just it was well written enough and well acted enough that I got about 3 or 4 belly laughs per show. So that was my little liberation from working. But otherwise, it's so much damage that mainstream economics has done to the real world that I spend my time working on that full time, and I have no choice, and it's their fault.
True. Understandably so. And I mean, and how are you sort of, I mean, are you completely engaged with your academic work as of the moment, or are you leaning into
the main thing I'm doing, which
endeavors as well?
Somewhat independent of my academic work, is to do my academic work. I invented a package originally called Minsky. You should probably aware. It's this dynamic modeling tool. And then when my university position in Sydney was destroyed by the university bureaucrats deciding to shut down the economics department and making redundant all 5 professors of economics, including me. When that happened, I thought I'd pull up. That's why I was finished at the University of Western Sydney. The university administration, its infinite wisdom, decided it didn't need an economics department. Then a couple of days later, it found out that if it did that, it also destroyed its accounting degree, which was a cash cow, because accountants had to do 1 unit. So they were forced to reinstate what they destroyed. And this is what happens when you have professional managers running universities. Haven't got a bloody idea, and they ruin education. Anyway, that meant that I thought I had to find some alternative income source at some point. So with the person with whom I developed what was then called Minsky, we started developing an idea I had before I became an academic for a data analysis system called Ravel. And we've now been working on that. And my hope is that we can make enough money out of Ravel, which is got a business intelligence program. We hope, we're certainly not doing it at the moment, but we hope to make enough out of that to finance the non-orthodox work I do in economics, because the universities will never properly fund critiques of economics. The mainstream will take out the leading universities. Rebels end up in low-rank universities with insecure funding systems. They then get shut down at some point. It happens with monotonous regularity around the planet. And that means that if you want to develop an alternative approach to economics, you've got to do it outside the university sector.
Okay. So, nice. I mean, I think that is what the current reality is, unfortunately. It was different in the 60s. It was different in the 60s and the 70s. Did the interesting ones have a place within the period?
I remember if you go back to the 60s, and this is before peer review became dominant, which is another issue, because peer review, people outside university think peer review means quality control. What it can mean is enforcing the views of a dominant paradigm, and that's what is happening. If there was peer review for physics, it's quite possible Einstein's equation would never have been published, or Max Planck would never have been able to publish his proof that the energy comes in discrete units, because the peers all say, I'm sorry, you've got that wrong. Energy is continuous. Let's look at Maxwell. Let's not deviate from the great book, etc., etc. So peer review actually enforces the dominant paradigm. And that applies to every discipline. It's not. It then comes down to what's the actual character of the discipline as to whether that causes problems or not. In economics, it means that the neoclassicals get to review anybody who submits something which doesn't make neoclassical assumptions. They reject you out of hand. You get desk rejections rather than being reviewed by referees as well. And end up you get a monolithic culture in the journals. But if you go back to the 50s and 60s, before that became a problem. So I remember one of my remarkable when I first decided to stop trusting the textbooks, because I had a brilliant lecturer in first year show me that the argument that you should be best off to abolish all trade unions and abolish all monopolies was wrong if you had both monopolies and trade unions. Abolishing one or the other, according to conventional theory, made social welfare worse. And that was my shock moment that, oh dear, okay. Yeah. That's why I was worried about. We had to make sure we had a system which can survive you dropping out, which your internet connection is dodgy. So you're on a wireless system, I presume?
Yes, I am on a wireless system.
It may be wireless, it may be your local telecommunications provider, but anyway. So I got to a point talking about I was talking on the you're going to do a bit of editing, unfortunately, to get rid
absolutely. That's non-negotiable now. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go back and you'll have to handle the previous line, but you asked me what's different in the 50s and 60s was your question. Please. So when this brilliant first year lecturer pointed out this fundamental flaw in the theory that as soon as you allow more than one imperfection from what neoclassicals describe as the nirvana of equilibrium, more than one exception, remove one, you make things worse. And I thought, there's something wrong with the theory. What's going on that causes this? And I was aware of economic journals, of course. Yes. So I went down after the lecturer and started looking in the journals, a section of the rather than textbooks. And I found a journal article, I think it was by Baduri, an Indian Marxist called Baduri, in the Economic Journal. Yeah. Baduri. Okay. And I was surprised. What's a Marxist doing being published in these journals? But at that stage, a Marxist could get published in the Economic Journal. Now a Marxist would be rejected, just rejected. Now I've got my criticisms of Marxian economics, but it shows how much more broad-minded and engaged in debate the profession was back in the 60s than it is now. And a lot of the errors began in the 60s because that's when Schaffer, Piero Schaffer, effectively used matrix mathematics to show that the theory of income distribution that is a critical part of neoclassical theory was false. Okay, and all this. So it's like the marginal product. They have the neoclassicals have this idea that workers get paid their marginal product, capitalists get paid their marginal product, and nobody's exploited. Okay, that's the basis of the conventional theory. That means you've got to be able to measure labor and capital have rates of return, so that you get paid a wage per hour and profit per unit of capital. The question then comes, how do you define units of capital? And when the neoclassical theory has a circularity between the rate of profit and the measurement of capital. And they basically wave their hands about that and say, the rate of return is set by the productivity of capital, but the amount of capital you've got is measured by the rate of return. So you get a circularity. So Schaffer proposed a way of measuring capital which is independent of that. And that was to reduce capital to elements of dated labor. And then you presume to have an economy in perfect equilibrium for an infinite period of time. So all prices are market equilibrium prices. And what Schaffer showed...
The interconnectedness of commodities as well. Right? Yeah.
Well, the main thing he showed was that if you measure capital properly, you no longer have a simple relationship between the rate of profit and the amount of capital. And that was something that Samuelson got involved on the other side, fighting Schaffer, as a debate between Cambridge, UK and Cambridge Massachusetts, which is where MIT is based. And so
Is
they
it the
had
Cambridge Capital controversy by any chance?
the capital controversies. And Samuelson
Yes, yes.
conceded defeat, okay? Because Samuelson,
Yes.
at one point, Samuelson said, look, I've got a clever solution to this problem, and that is that we teach students a parable. We teach students that they've got this smoothly varying capital to labor ratio, as if you
Yes.
can easily change the ratio of machinery to labor. He said that's just obviously false. Every technology has a fixed ratio between labor and capital. So what we've got instead of a curve, we have a series of triangles where if you have a high rate of profit, you're going to have a low amount of capital being used, and a low rate of profit, a high amount of capital being used, and that you get a whole set of rectangles, which if you then join them all together, you get that smooth curve. So the smooth curve is just a parable. Now, Grignani, an Italian non-orthodox economist,
Pierangelo Grignani, right?
he proved that rule that Samuelson thought solved the problem only applied if the capital to labor ratio was identical in all industries. Now, that was such a shock to Samuelson that he was literally saying, oh my God, these guys are right and I'm wrong. And he conceded defeat in the debate. So I read that in 1971, was published in 1966 in the Economic Journal. I think it may have been the Journal of Review of Economic Studies might have published. I've got to take a look and see. But that was Samuelson's concession defeat. It's called a summing up. And so he conceded defeat. The marginal productivity theory of income distribution is wrong. What are they teaching today? The same, pardon the French, the same fucking theory, okay? And most neoclassicals don't even know that they lost that debate. In fact, people like Paul Krugman think they won that debate. And so they end up just continuing on. You've blown, it's like you've blown a hole on the side of the Titanic, and the ship thinks it's still on the surface of the ocean. They think they can carry on. They should be on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's gone. It's a false paradigm, but they continue teaching it. And therefore, the only way you're going to get a new paradigm designed is outside the university sector, where you can break away from their dominance.
Absolutely. I have a question that's a natural follow-up to what you had said right now. So they had conceded defeat in the Cambridge Capital controversy. There's within the Indian sort of pedagogy, we have intermediate we have introductory microeconomics and then intermediate microeconomics, wherein the dominant neoclassical paradigm and its sort of appurtenances and its the essential sort of features and the structures are taught. But there is a separate subject called advanced microeconomics, in which, you know where I'm going with this. I think in which whatever was taught in introductory microeconomics, MR is equal to MC, was empirically unfounded by two economists, Hall and Hitch.
Yeah, not only two. There's about 70 surveys that have been done, and all of them have found, literally every last survey, all of them have said that the conventional model is wrong.
And this was by happenstance. It wasn't even purposefully. There was no conspiracy behind this. It was incidental.
Yeah, that's right.
This discovery.
Because it actually originated what's called the Oxford Economic Group. And I've forgotten which particular Oxford economist thought this was a good idea. But this is back in the 20s and 30s. So, high status for universities, high status for Oxford and Cambridge, obviously. And so someone in Oxford decided to form what they call the Oxford Economic Group. And they thought they'd organize regular dinners at Oxford University, very high dinner thing, and invite along a number of industrialists so that industrialists could inform theoreticians. A member of the economics department at Oxford University decided it'd be a great idea to have manufacturers meeting up with economists so they could exchange ideas. And that's where the Oxford Economic Group was formed. So what happened was they'd invite some leading industrialists from London, and that was a prestige thing to be invited to Oxford in those days. So the manufacturers would come along and they'd sit around in armchairs, having had a good dinner, drinking port, drinking sherry, chatting about their approaches to economics, and they found they couldn't understand each other. It was quite incredulous. So the economists all assumed rising marginal cost, and And the just is saying, what's that? And then the economists say, well, as you produce more output, you get less output per variable unit you input while you've got fixed capital. And they're going, huh? Sorry, we have factories with spare production lines in them because we're in a competitive market. And if we can take a sale away from our rival, we gain, our rival loses. And our cost of production, we design factories so the cost of production falls as output rises per unit. Not rise. Where do you get this idea that the cost rises? And so that led to the first survey by Hall and Hitch, and that's about the only one the neoclassicals will acknowledge. And they found something of the order of 85% of the firms they surveyed said their marginal costs are constant or falling. And then that trend has continued all the way through the literature. And initially, it was just an accidental and shocking discovery by neoclassical economists. Now, when confronted with that, there's two reactions you can have. You can cease being a neoclassical economist, or you can ignore what you've learned. And a handful went on to continue ignoring what they learned, but a smaller handful still said, hang on a second, this just makes the whole theory different, because if you don't have rising marginal cost, you no longer have the price mechanism guaranteeing marginal benefit equals marginal cost. There's something wrong with the thinking there.
Indeed.
So, and that's really, in some ways, you can date the beginning of what's called post-Keynesian economics, not to Keynes and not to Cambridge University, but to this group in Oxford before Keynes published his general theory. And then from that point on, you had a combination of macroeconomists largely taking the lead from Keynes and being critical of the neoclassical mainstream, but a group of people who are mainly industrialists, manufacturers themselves, who became academics, fighting against this delusional vision of how firms actually operate. But the delusion is still taught and still believed in by the vast majority of mainstream economists.
Yes. We are also, we are led like sheep into, a forest by the false shepherd.
They think you're leading. They think you're leading you into nirvana. They really believe they've got and this is one of the problems, because the neoclassical vision, as I said earlier, is an anarchist system. They have anarchy means no government.
Yes.
And what they have was an ideal market-based anarchist system that everybody gets paid what they deserve. You'll get your marginal product. You get maximization of social utility at the minimum possible cost. There's no power. There's no coercion. It's the description of a perfect anarchist society. And that vision seduces so many mainstream economists without them even realizing that's what they've fallen for. So they end up being devotees and zealots for their preferred social system. And then what they try to do is rearrange real economies so they look more like the textbook. But because the textbook is based on fallacies, the results of them doing that are catastrophic.
Yes, true. But I do have a slight sort of not a contention per se, but I don't understand one crucial element of this entire sort of story of Hall and Hitch. Now, Hall and Hitch had empirically unfounded and theoretically disproved the paradigm. But the defense, a man by the name of Fritz, who
I know Machlup.
happened to be
Yeah,
but who happened to be a member of the Austrian school, not of the neoclassical paradigm. He happened to be a heterodox person defending the orthodoxy.
The Austrians are sort of neoclassicals on steroids in some ways, or maybe
on steroids, but they don't adopt math. I think they're fairly against math. So there's a little bit of discordance. So there are lots of, let's say, contradictory elements within the periphery of economics that don't really sort of make a lot of sense. It lends itself to a more sort of nuanced position on a lot of different things. You don't have strict factions as such. That's my interpretation.
The Austrian school basically the advantage of the Austrian school is they recognize that equilibrium is a myth. Okay, you don't reach equilibrium. And they say the strength of the market economy is how it reacts to disequilibrium. So they see the entrepreneur as somebody who exploits a gap between the current market and a potential outcome. So disequilibrium is their driving factor. But they still basically think this roughly describes where you are. So like the neoclassicals will work out the mathematics of being at the point of intersection. On the Austrians, they're going to be fluctuating around the outside of it, to some extent. And they're still making that their reference point. But if you look at what the critiques have established, you don't reach these. It's not stable in the first place. So their reference point, they accept in a sense that the mathematical stuff the neoclassicals have done is right, but they say they're slightly outside that, and we allow for disequilibrium and so on. But in fact, all the critiques blow them apart as well. So one major the way that the neoclassicals handle changing the capital labor ratio is to talk about measuring the amount of capital and getting a lower rate of return for meaning you use more labor. If you have a low rate of return on capital, you're going to use more capital on labor, et cetera, et cetera. And if the rate of interest rises, then they talk about high rate of interest, lower leads to capital. Well, the capital controversy showed that was false. You had what's called re-switching, and that's the point that really blew Samuelson away, that you can have at a high interest rate, one technology is used, say technology A, at a medium technology B, and a low technology A comes back in again because the measurement effect that they're ignoring, that Sraffa solves. So you have a nonlinearity there. Now, the Austrians think they get around it by talking about roundaboutness. So they say a high rate of interest is going to mean use a less roundabout production system. A low rate of interest means a high use of capital, and a more roundabout. The roundaboutness also fails. So the Austrians think they've managed to avoid the problems, but they haven't. But of course, they still are wedded to that. If you don't have rising marginal costs, then what the Austrians see is this: the price mechanism doesn't work either. So they also ignore these criticisms. That's why Machlup came on and defended the neoclassical theory, because indirectly he's also defending the Austrians.
Yes. But the Austrians themselves find themselves in dire contrast to the neoclassical Keynesian orthodoxy. Right? Neoclassical at the micro level, Keynesian at the macro level, the pedagogical
the Austrians have a. The Austrians, the ultimate armchair theorist. The idea of praxeology. You can sit in an armchair and work it out because the economy is actually inside your head. I haven't got a factory in my head.
No,
okay. Their praxeology assumes that they can work out what applies not just to consumption, where maybe you can look inside your head and work, also production. Well, I'm sorry, they don't have factories inside their heads. Their brains don't tell them how factories operate. You've got to go and ask factories how they operate, and when you do, you find that factories are designed by engineers to reach maximum efficiency at maximum scale of output. When they're produced, you'd be an idiot in a growing economy if your factory was 100% employed on day one. So you have at least 30% spare capacity out of new factories. And then in a competitive market, unless you have spare capacity, you can't take sales away from your rivals. In the real world, you actually you know who your rivals are, and you're trying to take market share from them. So if you don't have the capacity, you can't take the market share. So there's competitive reasons to have spare capacity. And the whole idea of diminishing marginal productivity relies upon the normal firm having more variable units of input, i.e. workers, than they have machines. The ideal ratio, might be 10 workers to one machine. You've actually got 15 workers to one machine. That's so their vision is actually overcapacity. Now you look in the real world, it's undercapacity, and for good reasons. It's not wasting space. If you don't have the undercapacity, you can't take sales away from rivals. You can't take advantage of their mistakes, and you're going to be building factories all the time, which as soon as you produce them, you've got to build another one because you're fully employed. It's ignorant. In a growing system, you will always have spare capacity. And then on top of that, there are competitive reasons for it as well. So the conditions for diminishing marginal productivity simply never apply to a real world factory.
True. So I'd like to come to institutional economics for a second, paralleling the Halls and Hitch sort of paradigmatic fusion of the heterodoxy supporting the orthodoxy. Simon Kuznets, the person who had invented the GDP, he had a good personal rapport with someone by the name of Wesley Mitchell,
Oh,
who
yeah.
had
Okay. Yeah.
who had invented the Bureau of Economic Research, the NBA. Yeah, I forget the exact name of it. But I had actually read somewhere that it was under Wesley Mitchell's influence and possibly even his orders that Simon Kuznets was tasked with the assignment of coming up with a new form of national income accounting and also GDP.
Yeah.
So again, here Wesley Mitchell isn't an orthodox person, but GDP is now the pinnacle is at the pinnacle of orthodoxy, sort of being the prime yardstick that everyone, economist, non-economist, student, 5-year-old, 70-year-old, everyone unanimously uses to sort of understand the world around them in an empirical sense.
Yeah.
So, but here again, it's heterodoxy complementing the orthodoxy. I find this slightly weird. I mean,
it happens all the time because in that sense, that if you want to get somebody to look at empirical data, get a heterodox thinker, not an orthodox one.
okay.
Yeah, that's the way the orthodoxy thinks they know what why bother asking somebody when you already know what they're doing, and that arrogance that sits inside the neoclassicals. Again, it's because it's describing a perfect system. So the system can't be not perfect, and therefore you don't even go and ask anybody in it how does it actually operate. So the extent to which neoclassicals are divorced from reality is it's ludicrous, and it's what worse over time. At least back in the 30s and 40s, they would hire people like Kuznets and Leontiev and so on to produce what have become fundamental elements of their modeling these days. But they don't. They can't break out of the belief in a Pareto optimal equilibrating system.
Interesting. So, if the tools of demand and supply and equilibrium were to evolve, what should be the next stage in the evolution of economic tools? What kind of tools should we be using? Apart from
differential equations and system dynamics. That's the fundamentals. Like, for example, I've recently, like in the last 10 years, I've realized that the models that I've built, so I took Goodwin's growth cycle model, added private debt to it, and generated a model of Minsky's financial instability hypothesis, and then added government to that using Kalecki's ideas about government spending actually ending up boosting profits. And put that together and got a model that is effectively a complex system version of modern monetary theory. This is back in 1992 when I first built that model. Now, in the last decade or so, I've realized that, in fact, I can derive that model directly from strictly true macroeconomic definitions. So if you take the GDP with the employment ratio, which is the number of people with the job divided by population, the wages share of GDP, which is wages divided by GDP, and make extremely simple assumptions to link the two. So you assume that workers have more bargaining power with a high rate of employment than a low rate of employment. You get Goodwin's growth cycle. So you're just working from very simple definitions. You can get straight to a cyclical model of the economy. Add in private debt, so you have the debt to GDP ratio. Assume that capitalists invest more during booms than slumps, and you get Minsky. Then add in government and say government spending in excess of taxation, have that ratio, so the government deficit divided by GDP, and again make the simplifying assumption that the deficit will be higher for the lower the rate of employment, the higher the deficit's going to be. Put that in, you get a complex system version of modern monetary theory. So working like within a day's lecture, the students can handle calculus. Then I'd have them understanding capitalism as a complex system. That's where we should start from. And then we use system dynamics to go beyond that, because one of the major reasons that neoclassical economics ended up in the toilet in terms of its capacity to reason about the real world is that they force an equilibrium result on everything. And when you look back and if you read Jevons and Marshall and and Clark and so on in the 19th century, you find that they regarded equilibrium as a shortcut to doing dynamic modeling. And they presumed that the equilibrium stuff would get the same results as the dynamic. Now, they were right that equilibrium was a shortcut. They couldn't have done anything in the 19th century they wanted to actually do real processes of change with dynamic systems. But they're wrong that the static conclusions are the same as the dynamic. But what they then, because they continued failing to reach the conclusions they wished to reach in the static stuff, they put their energies into that. And part of the result was that equilibrium went from being a crutch to the belief in a fundamental characteristic of capitalism. And then they force equilibrium throughout when the systems itself are unstable. So this fetish with equilibrium is the reason why neoclassical economics has not advanced.
It is not advanced, yes, sir. But okay, so is the usage of mathematics? I think differential equations is used in macroeconomic modeling and in aggregates. I mean, I learned differential equations in my sort of curriculum. We use differential equations and difference equations both, interspersed with other mathematical tools as well. But is the high-powered usage of mathematics in the heterodoxy a reason for the orthodoxy's triumph over the heterodox, in the sense of it prides itself in predictive power, and it sort of linearizes when you sort of use mathematics, you sort of limit the number of things that can go out of control, right? You necessarily have to sort of fit into that specific set of equations, what all can happen, yielding a certain kind of result, right, or reducing a certain kind of result. Can there be a non-mathematical approach that can be adopted en masse within the heterodox domain?
I think, no, I disagree. I think the mathematics is what matters, because the neoclassicals, I call what they do mathematics, okay? Because they get results which they don't like. So they make a mythical assumption to get past it. And it looks like mathematics to somebody who's not educated in mathematics, or not critical in looking at assumptions. But it's not. It's not genuine mathematics. A Pakistani colleague of mine, Asad Zaman, calls it mathemagics. Okay, so like, for example, if you look at what are called the Sonnenschein and Mantel-de-Boer theorem, that was an attempt by mathematical economists to work out whether the market demand curve had the same characteristic of an individual demand curve, that it sloped down with the price, the so-called law of demand. And they then found that the only way they could guarantee that an individual demand curve could replicate what a market demand curve became was that all individuals were the same and all commodities were the same. Okay. Now that is a proof by contradiction that the market demand curve, using neoclassical theory, cannot be derived to have the same characteristics as an individual demand curve. And what do? They make crazy assumptions specifically at that point. So Gorman, for example, developed what they call the Gorman demand equation. And that equation, Gorman literally himself said that the necessary condition quoted above is intuitively reasonable. It says, in effect, that an extra dollar of spending power will be spent in the same way, no matter to whom it is given. That's not intuitively reasonable. It's intuitively bullshit. If you give a billionaire an extra dollar, they're going to invest it in some stock. You give a homeless person a dollar, they're going to buy some food. It completely ignores the distribution of income. And of course, the neoclassical theory of the at micro level does ignore the distribution of income. It talks about your income, but not how your income is related to somebody else's. So it's not mathematical, it's mathematical. And if you do the mathematics properly, you end up in system dynamics and complex systems, which is where I work. So it's not a case of wanting a non-mathematical. You want people who are intimidated by mathematics to realize that neoclassicals aren't mathematical, they're mathematical.
They're mathematical. Interesting. Okay, well, I mean, if there is a mathematical side to heterodoxy, can there be a non-mathematical side if people have a disinclination towards it?
Oh, you can. Yes, there's philosophical foundations that give you a way of thinking about a capitalist economy, but ultimately, the the systems thinking way is where we should have gone.
Can there be systems thinking without maths? Is there a possibility?
You can have influence diagrams, and you can have to try to work out verbal causal chains.
Yes.
Okay, but the thing, I've very rarely seen anybody work with purely verbal logic and actually reach a consistent conclusion. Like, for example, the only person, like Keynes himself, quite frequently would make verbal deductions about something which are mathematically wrong. The only person I've read who's ever started from a verbal starting point and reached a sensible conclusion that is consistent with this is Schumpeter, looking at the theory of economic development. He was brilliant. But in verbal models, people with the verbal model will often make the false deduction out of it. So the advantage with putting things in differential equation form, the differential equations show you the outcome. So like I think the belief that the future lies in getting rid of mathematics is an error, and I've been fighting that error for 50 years. The error is believing that neoclassicals actually do good mathematics. They do not.
They do not. But I think whether one is inclined towards or whether one is is disapproving of maths, I think there's a common consensus that the neoclassical paradigm should come down without any
I mean, I think the neoclassical paradigm is similar to the phlogiston theory of chemistry or the Ptolemaic theory of astronomy. It's just the wrong paradigm. And it's not mathematics that's the problem, it's the paradigm which is at fault. You've got to change the paradigm. And then when you do, a different mathematical technique becomes necessary. And we've developed that. We couldn't have done it back in the 19th century. We can in the 20th and 21st. And therefore you analyze the system dynamically, or you have evolutionary logic, which is even more complicated and more limited because we don't have the technical skills to be able to show evolution in mathematical form. Okay. But evolutionary and complex systems, that's the way we should be going, and throwing the neoclassical away.
Right. And I'd like to actually shed some light on post-Keynesian economics as well. Could you shed light on post-Keynesian endogeneity money theory? And I think I've noticed, it's my interpretation and I find an implication in it. The efficacy of interest rates is neutralized. The rise in interest rates, the lowering and the spiking up of interest rates, they don't really play an effect within that world.
Yeah, I mean,
if money is endogenous.
Yeah, well, money it changes the dynamics dramatically, and this is one reason that neoclassicals stick with the belief that the money is exogenous, set by the government rather than set by the market system, is that means they can ignore the banking sector. So rather than being experts on money, economists are experts on dreaming up reasons that you don't need to have money in your macroeconomic models. So that's the loanable funds model and the money multiplier, both of which are taught to students, both of which are believed by mainstreamers, and both of which are wrong. So the endogenous money approach, which came out of Basil Moore back in the 1970s, there were people before him like Schumpeter and Fisher both realized that money was endogenous and the impact that had on the economy as well. But Ravel resuscitated that in the 1970s. And when you look at and then I've done this work more recently with in debates in the review of Keynesian economics and so on, that when you have endogenous money, the change in private debt is a part of aggregate demand and aggregate income. So consequently, the monetary system expands and contracts demand for goods and services at a real level, and it includes asset markets. So you must include the banking sector in a model of a capitalist economy. And the neoclassical's excuse for not doing it is invalid.
Okay. Interesting. Nice. And I think I'd like to ask you a slightly provocative question now. Do you think there are any merits to the orthodoxy as such? Absolutely none. I agree.
It's the same as, like, people often say, they think, oh, surely you'll keep something. Well, what did Galileo keep of Ptolemaic astronomy? The observations, that's about it. Observations showing orbits were elliptical. That's and that was done more by Tycho Brahe than it was by the Ptolemaic astronomers anyway. So, and the only thing which Galileo kept from the Ptolemaics, the idea that orbits were circular, that was a mistake. Okay, so one of the reasons the original attempts by Galileo to replace the Ptolemaic system weren't accurate, he stuck with the assumption of circular motion, whereas we get from Kepler, Kepler and ultimately Newton that orbits are elliptical because of the mutual gravitational attraction of two massive bodies.
Right.
So there was nothing that was kept by Galileo of the Ptolemaic system, and the same thing will apply if we get rid of neoclassical. You might have some of their ideas about market. That doesn't mean that no good work has been done by any neoclassical economists. So some stuff on market definitions and Dutch auctions and things of that nature, there's some worthwhile work there. Some of the statistical work to some extent, but most of econometric is econ. So there'd be very little you'd keep. And like even the fact that they're still using difference equations most of the time, just bad mathematical choices as well. So I wouldn't keep anything from the neoclassicals in the new paradigm.
That's interesting. With respect to the heterodoxy, there are lots of sort of conflicting opinions within the Marxians, within the Austrians, within the NMT folks, within the post-Keynesians, within some of the banking school folks as well. But in the orthodoxy, there seems to have been concessions made to allow for a more cohesive whole of a faction, as compared to the heterodox, wherein the voices are slightly more disparate and dispersed.
Yeah, well, there's no unifying theory of value for the non-neoclassical school. The one advantage of the neoclassical, they all believe in, subjective utility was the foundation of their analysis of capitalism. So they all, neoclassicals, again, more extreme with the idea of indifference curves, but Austrians equally believe that there's a utility seeking behavior and everything is subjective and there's no objective foundation, et cetera, et cetera. I think there is a foundation for the non-neoclassical school not in the labor theory of value from Marx, but Marx's dialectical philosophy. And I've explained that foundation for non-neoclassical economics in Marx's dialectics, which does not lead to the labor theory of value, but uses the idea of an objective theory of value starting out, which explains where economic performance comes from in the very first instance, but leads to subjective at high levels of analysis. The dialectical structure enables you to go from like objective conditions setting the means of production, but subjective things setting the demand for new commodities, for example. So there's a way in which that dialectical philosophy is a proper foundation. I'll quickly share my screen here, one of my screens. Okay, this one, because that's me. I've got an award in So I went to Marx's own birthplace, and what I do down at the end is I include my thesis on Marx, which I think that's linked in. If I use this one here, let's see. Yeah, same thing for the Patreon site. And then what I've got is my thesis on Marx. I'll just bring that up quickly. It's going to download it for me rather than show it on screen. But I'll do that. I'll put up with it that way. Let's just take a look at it quickly.
Can I put the link to this in the description,
absolutely.
the user exchange?
So what I show is the labor theory of value is false. Okay, according to Marx's philosophy, it's not just Raffer's input-output system being used to disprove it, and I'll particularly towards the end. But what I show towards the end is you can have a philosophical foundation that starts this. I'll just actually make that full screen there. So that is Marx's idea of a dialectic, which comes from Hegel, that you have a unity embedded in a society. Society focuses upon one aspect of the unity, which becomes the foreground. the unity can't exist without
Yes.
the background elements, which are ignored by the system itself, which gives rise to attention. So that's the basis of Marx's dialectic, and you can then apply that to work out where profit comes from, where this is applying it to a more general framework of saying money is going to have a subjective valuation. Modern technology will as well. To actually turn your surplus commodities into surplus money, you have to go through effective demand. You get that turning up in the system as well. So all this stuff leads to that gives you a foundation. We could have a shared foundation. But again, post-Keynesians, often a lot of post-Keynesians are ex-Marxists who got sick and tired of all the ideology. On both sides, you got the neoclassicals who gave up and become post-Keynesians, and Marxists who gave up and become post-Keynesians. So they tend to shy away from philosophy, but I think this approach to philosophy would give them a unifying theory of value. We do need that. That's an important thing which is missing from the heterodoxy at the moment.
At the moment. Nice. And final question, sir. How do we go about from here?
There's no chance of reforming major universities because the neoclassicals will drive us away from everywhere. I don't think there is. I've given up on the possibility of defeating them. My main focus now is that their work on climate change is so appallingly bad that they are going to be responsible for fooling us into believing that climate change is no great problem. Capitalism can handle with it easily, and capitalism is going to collapse. Yes. Okay.
Indeed.
So in that situation, I hope to prosecute them. I believe that the work that's done by Nordhaus and all his fellow travelers and what they call the economics of climate change, I believe that's criminally negligent. Okay, because there is no Hippocratic oath for economists. So they don't, like if a doctor did bad surgery, you can sue them for malpractice. Okay, economists don't have a Hippocratic oath. They should. But if you look at it, the damage they are going to do to human civilization is so great that I believe they've committed the crime of ecocide without even being aware they're doing it. So you can have there'll be prosecutions in future for ecocide against fossil fuel companies and climate change deniers like Bjorn Lomborg and so on. But the economists have done it by accident. Now, can negligence be a basis for ecocide? Definitely, it can. So I want to sue this lot for ecocide. Nordhaus told the whole lot. So that's so in that case, there's no solution, but there is a predicament that we're in courtesy of their stupid treatment of what global warming actually means. They have no idea, and therefore capitalism is going to start collapsing under the weight of global warming long before, far faster than people have been fooled into believing by neoclassical economists on the one hand and fossil fuel companies on the other. So in that situation, maybe we'll start understanding if they got this wrong, how did they get everything else wrong? And that's the current book I'm working on. I'm working on a book called How Economists Will Destroy Capitalism. Okay,
amazing.
And that's I think our solution is not. We're not going to find a solution. We're going to be in a predicament, and part of why we got there is believing neoclassical economics.
Interesting. I mean, I don't think any economist has a moral compass as of the moment. Most economists don't.
They won't. No, they're going to be more surprised than anybody. Like the global financial crisis, the people who knew the least about the approach of that were the economists who are supposed to be in charge of the economy. People like Bernanke, Sargent, Lucas, all that mob. They had no bloody idea a crisis was coming. And then when they reacted to it, they followed textbook advice about something that the textbook said couldn't happen. So we ended up with their so-called reforms making things worse. So it's going to be the same thing with global warming. And the first thing we should do is kick economists out of any conversation over what to do with global warming.
Interesting. Well, thank you, sir, for appearing on the podcast. I seriously apologize for the internet issues on my end. I won't repeat myself on that. note. Do you have any sort of observations or any advice for me apart from the internet issues? As this
Well,
is
learn system dynamics and get hold of my Ravel software.
learn systems dynamics.
Okay,
Yes.
it's still the documentation is nowhere near as strong as I'd like it to be, and there are bugs and the usual sort of thing. But as a way of understanding how the economy operates as a system, learn how to drive Ravel.
Ravel. Okay. So it's more of a programming language,
No,
or is it?
it's. I'll just actually bring up. I'll share the screen with it in a moment. But it's. I'll just actually just drag this over here. Hang on a second, and then share once more.
Yes.
So that's Ravel as a object or a website on Patreon. And what it lets you do, as well as numerical analysis, which is what we're featuring here, it lets you model this economy as a complex system. So if I I'll bring up one example here. For example, I haven't actually got anything prepared, but I'll find something that's okay. I'll just go inside and find. This is in the lecture course I'm giving online. If I find, let's see. This is the classic Goodwin's growth cycle model, which you can derive very simply from the definitions of wages share of GDP and the employment rate. But you get a very simple model, and you get a cyclical system coming out of it. And the Ravel makes it more obvious than the other programs in system dynamics, the actual equations that are generated as part of that system, and so on. So if you start using the right tools, you end up with a proper vision of the capitalist economy as a complex system. So learn
as a complex
system dynamics is the way to go.
Is the way to go. True, sir. And I mean, this is a general sort of question for the way for the kind of questions I'd asked in this particular session. Did we touch upon certain topics that weren't touched upon in any of your earlier podcasts?
You've got more of an interest in the actual economic theory in that sense. So I have, So I've covered a couple of things in more detail than what we've done elsewhere.
Okay, so I think that I want to bring that aspect out as much as possible. And are you still in touch with any neoclassical folks as such, and do you maintain a good rapport?
Oh, look, I've got a couple of, some of my best friends are neoclassical economists, okay? Old mates from the university in Sydney, so I still see them. We talk more tennis than we do economics, but the thing is they're decent people, okay? And most of them are trying to do good. They don't realize they're doing harm. So, I'll have friends because they're good people, not because of their reasoning approach.
Yes, well, I think possibly they're just misguided.
Yeah, good hearts, discarded minds.
And then I'll run the.
Sorry.
I'll run the final output, but I'll run the final output by you once if you need any sort of minor changes, or if you want to.
Ed, go ahead. I don't have time to come back and make comments and edit, so just go ahead. I'll be happy. I trust you. Okay, just get yourself a bit more trustworthy internet connection. That's all. The next time.
Yes.
Okay. Good to meet you, Richard.
See you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, and I'll stop recording. I'll send this to you once it's downloaded.
Yes.